Most people do not lose with money because they are lazy. They lose because they are running the wrong operating system. I have watched this mistake for decades. A person earns more, works harder, gets promoted, feels smarter, and still stays one emergency away from fear. They think the problem is income. Very often the problem is architecture. A broken operating system does not get fixed by feeding it a larger paycheck. It simply crashes at a higher dollar amount. That is why I do not begin with dreams. I begin with code. If your money keeps arriving and disappearing, you do not need another burst of motivation. You need rules that decide where each dollar is allowed to go before your appetite, your stress, your vanity, and your fatigue start voting on it. Most people let all four vote. That is, financial self-sabotage disguised as freedom. When I look at how ordinary people handle money, I see the same bug again and again. They treat income as permission. I treat income as raw material. They ask what they can buy. I ask what their system can survive. They celebrate a raise. I check whether their operating costs just quietly rose to meet it. That is the first brutal truth. A bigger income does not automatically create wealth. In many cases, it only creates a more expensive identity. You can make $10,000 a year and stay trapped. You can make $1 million a year and still run a fragile system. The numbers change. The code does not. So if I were speaking plainly to someone who wanted to stop living like a financial accident waiting to happen, I would give them a very simple operating system. I would tell them that every dollar needs 3 assignments: a spending ceiling, a shock absorber, an ownership channel. That is the entire game in plain English. If you do not cap spending, life expands until you are busy funding a costume. If you do not build a shock absorber, one bad week knocks you into debt. If you do not build an ownership channel, you stay dependent on labor forever. Most people fail in all 3 places at once. They spend as if income is permanent. They save as if emergencies are rare. They invest as if someday will arrive by itself. It never does. The first line of code is simple. No more than 75 cents of every dollar gets permission to leave your life for spending. I do not care whether you call it 75%, a ceiling, or a spending firewall. What matters is that you stop treating consumption like a reward for being tired. People hear a rule like that and think I am telling them to live like a monk. I am not. I am telling them to stop confusing flexibility with recklessness. A spending ceiling does 2 things that change a life. First, it forces comparison. Second, it forces value. Comparison is what most people avoid because it bruises the ego. Premium gas or regular, the expensive grocery cart that flatters your identity or the cheaper one that feeds the same body, the shiny car with a monthly payment or the ordinary one that still gets you home. Most people hate these decisions because they expose the fact that much of what they buy is not utility. It is theater. Theater is expensive. Wealthy people who stay wealthy usually understand that long before everyone else does. One of the funniest truths in money is that poor people often spend to look secure, while secure people often spend with astonishing indifference to appearances. I have seen men with serious money ask for the cheap option without a drop of embarrassment. I have seen millionaires split a dinner bill down to the last detail, not because they are desperate, but because waste offends them. That is not stinginess. That is clean code. A person with a good operating system does not need a dramatic lifestyle to prove anything. They are not buying applause from strangers who are too distracted to care. The second thing a spending ceiling does is far more important. It forces you to think in terms of value instead of habit. A lot of bad financial advice focuses on tiny moral performances. Stop buying coffee. Stop spending $5 here. Stop enjoying yourself there. That is childish. The point is not to eliminate pleasure. The point is to stop paying premium prices for low value impulses. If a small purchase truly improves your day, sharpens your work, lowers your stress, or gives you disproportionate return, then the price tag may be trivial compared with the value. That is rational. I have never believed the goal was joyless living. I believe the goal is intelligent allocation. The real leak is usually not the cup of coffee. The real leak is the large purchase that flatters you for 3 weeks and then becomes invisible while the payment remains fully visible every month. That is where ordinary people damage themselves. They do not get destroyed by one sandwich. They get destroyed by the car that became normal in 60 days. The apartment chosen for status instead of stability. The furniture financed to impress guests who visit twice. The vacations purchased with the next 3 months of peace. A spending ceiling is not punishment. It is a reality filter. It forces you to ask a hard question before money leaves your control. Am I buying something that creates durable value, or am I renting a passing emotion at a permanent cost? Most people never ask that question. They only ask whether they can afford the payment. That is not the same thing. A payment is a monthly symptom, cost is the system-wide damage. This is where the first great divide appears. One person lives by desire. Another lives by design. The first person says yes until the month says no. The second person says no early, so the future can say yes. That is how wealth begins, not with brilliance, with structure. Now here is the part most people miss. If you only spend 60% of your income, the unused 15% is not free, floating fund money. It is not there to upgrade your lifestyle because you behaved for a month. It is evidence that the operating system is starting to work. That excess becomes reserve power for the rest of the code, which brings me to the second line. 10 cents of every dollar belongs to your shock absorber. Call it a cushion fund, emergency reserve, or sleep. At-night account. I do not care what name you use. I care that you build it before the world tests you. And the world will test you. Cars break. Roofs leak. Jobs vanish. Bodies fail. Family members need help. Flights get missed. Apartments flood. Tires blow in the wrong state at the wrong hour with the wrong mechanic, staring at you like your problem has a price tag attached to it. That is reality. If you do not have a shock absorber, every surprise becomes borrowed money. Borrowed money is not just a financial cost. It is a psychological cost. Debt taken under pressure is some of the ugliest money in the world. It comes wrapped in urgency, shame, and bad decisions. It turns a temporary disruption into a multi-year penalty. It makes you negotiate from weakness. It steals your ability to say no. It shrinks your standards. It narrows your choices. That is why I do not see an emergency fund as a cute savings habit. I see it as a defense perimeter around your dignity. Many people spend years trying to invest before they have earned the right to invest. They want to chase returns while living one cracked transmission away from panic. That is upside-down behavior. The market is not your first job. Stability is your first job. If your monthly expenses are $2,000, then 5 months of expenses is a $10,000 buffer. There is nothing mystical about it. It is arithmetic. You are buying time. You are buying breathing room. You are buying the ability to make one bad week stay one bad week. Time matters more than people realize. A person with no cushion makes decisions in hours. A person with a cushion makes decisions in months. That difference can alter an entire life. Without a reserve, you take the first ugly job offer because rent is due. With a reserve, you can wait for the right fit. Without a reserve, you swipe a card for the repair and then keep paying interest on the memory. With a reserve, the crisis hurts but does not metastasize. Without a reserve, every setback becomes an identity attack. With a reserve, it becomes a transaction. That is the psychological damage most people never calculate. Fragility taxes your mind before it taxes your wallet. When your operating system is weak, every surprise feels existential. You become reactive, emotional, easy to manipulate, and vulnerable to expensive shortcuts. You say yes to bad financing, bad subscriptions, bad employers, bad apartments, bad compromises. That is what financial fear does. It lowers standards in every direction. So yes, save the 10% until the cushion is built. Then stop treating saving as the finish line. That is another bug in the average system. People learn to save and then confuse stillness with progress. Money sitting forever is not always safety. Sometimes it is just unused power. The reserve has one job: protect the system. Once it is built, the next dollars need a different assignment. One more thing matters here. Where you store the cushion is part of the code. Many people leave their reserve in lazy accounts that pay almost nothing. As if convenience were the highest virtue in finance, It is not. I do not want my emergency money in a place that earns nothing when better options exist. A proper high-yield savings account will not make you rich, but it respects your capital more than a debt account at a giant bank that treats your money like cheap fuel. Do not misunderstand me. The cushion fund is not an investment account. It is not supposed to perform heroics. It is supposed to stay liquid, stable, and boring. Boring is what you want from a shock absorber. But boring and neglected are not the same thing. Keep it accessible, keep it clean, keep it where the interest rate is at least awake. Now, the third line of the operating system is where real wealth begins. 15 cents of every dollar must go into ownership. This is the line that separates workers from builders. School trains most people for labor. It teaches them how to become employable, how to follow deadlines, how to gather credentials, how to exchange attention and skill for a paycheck. There is nothing wrong with labor. I admire productive work. I admire competence. I admire discipline. But labor alone has a ceiling. It is linear. It depends on your continued participation. It stops when you stop. Ownership behaves differently. Ownership works while you sleep, while you travel, while you get sick, while you age, while you read, while you think. Ownership is not magic. It is just leverage with patience attached to it. This is where many people stay blind for far too long. They work, they earn, they pay bills, and they think that activity equals progress. It may equal survival. It does not automatically equal wealth. You can have a high income and still be broke in every meaningful sense if every dollar depends on next month's labor. You can spend every penny you make and still appear successful right up until life tests you. That is the salary mirage. It looks powerful from a distance. Up close, it has no reserve, no ownership, and no refusal power. Refusal power matters more than almost anyone admits. The ability to walk away from a bad boss, a manipulative client, a stupid deal, a desperate payday loan, or a humiliating compromise does not arrive through positive thinking. It arrives through assets. Assets buy distance between you and coercion. That is why ownership must be part of the code, not an occasional hobby after a bonus or a tax refund. If you leave ownership to whatever is left over, there will usually be nothing left over. Consumption is greedy. It will eat the future if you let it. Now, when people hear the word investing, they often imagine stock picking, drama, speed, and genius. That is another bug. Most wealth is not built by performing intelligence every week. It is built by routing money consistently into productive assets and letting time do the heaviest lifting. The tax structure matters here. A sensible operating system uses the legal tunnels that government already provides. Retirement accounts exist for a reason. If you qualify for a Roth IRA, the beauty is obvious. Your money goes in after tax, but the future growth can come out without tax in retirement. If handled properly, that is not a loophole for magicians. That is simply smart architecture. The government does not offer many gifts. When it does, I pay attention. The same principle applies to a 401k, especially when an employer offers a match. If your employer matches part of your contribution and you refuse to participate, you are not being conservative. You are stepping over free money because no one forced you to bend down and pick it up. I do not have a gentle phrase for that. It is a system error. A match is one of the rare moments in life when the first return on your money can be immediate. The details vary by employer, but the idea is the same. You contribute, they add money. Your account starts ahead. Very few investments will treat you that generously on day one. That does not mean every person should obsess over every account in the same sequence. Context matters, income matters, job structure matters, but the principle remains solid. Use the tax advantage channels. Do not hand over more than necessary to the tax collector, merely because you never learned the available routes. And for heaven's sake, once the account is open, actually invest the money. This sounds obvious, yet many people open a retirement account and leave the funds sitting idle in cash, then wonder years later why nothing grew. Opening a container is not the same as filling the machine. The account is the wrapper. The asset inside is what compounds. That is another reason the operating system matters. A lot of financial frustration comes from half-finished actions. People open accounts without allocating capital, buy products without understanding purpose, save without defining thresholds, invest without setting rules, and then call the result confusing. It is not confusing. It is incomplete. For most people, broad index funds do the job beautifully. You do not need to pretend to be the smartest person in the room. You do not need to guess the next hero stock every Tuesday. You do not need to build a casino and call it a portfolio. If you own a broad fund tracking, a major index, what you are really doing is buying a slice of productive enterprise across many companies. You get diversification, low friction, and the long-term compounding of business output. That is a far more rational path than turning your financial future into a weekly emotional referendum. I have always believed that investing should feel more like watching paint dry than watching fireworks. Fireworks attract attention, paint changes the house. That is what broad ownership does when paired with time. It changes the house. People underestimate the violence of compounding because it looks quiet at first. Put $100 a month into productive assets for long enough, and you eventually reach a point where your own contributions become the smaller part of the total. That is when the machine starts pulling its own weight. For years, you feel like you are pushing a heavy cart uphill. Then one day you notice the slope change. That is not luck. That is accumulated design. The great frustration of the early years is that the operating system feels unimpressive. Nobody applauds you for staying under a spending ceiling. Nobody throws a party because you funded 5 months of reserves. Nobody writes headlines because you contributed steadily to an index fund inside a retirement account. The world celebrates visible consumption. It almost never celebrates invisible structure. That is why so many people stay poor longer than they need to. They are addicted to visible proof: new car, better zip code, bigger television, louder life. They want evidence today, and the operating system asks for patience instead. It asks for quiet, for repetition, for delayed gratification, for a kind of emotional adulthood that most people were never taught. This is where the psychological battle gets serious. You are not just fighting mathematics. You are fighting identity. If your friends spend every raise, restraint will feel like deprivation. If your family treats money as a stress response, rules will feel unnatural. If your social circle rewards appearance, value-based spending will look cheap. If your culture worships convenience, comparison shopping will feel beneath you. So let me tell you something that matters. Wealth often looks socially unimpressive in the middle. In the middle, it looks like saying no when you could say yes. It looks like driving the unremarkable car long after you could upgrade. It looks like not inflating rent every time your salary rises. It looks like reading contracts. It looks like understanding fees. It looks like splitting the bill honestly. It looks like a boring account balance growing in silence. It looks like refusing the emotional logic of the crowd. Most people cannot do that consistently. That is why most people never reach durable freedom. Freedom is not a vibe. Freedom is a structure. Freedom means your bills do not bully your values. Freedom means a bad employer cannot buy your silence. Freedom means an emergency is a hassle, not a collapse. Freedom means your capital begins carrying part of your life instead of your body carrying all of it. And that brings me to the hidden mechanism under the whole system. Every dollar has two possible futures. It can become consumption that must be replaced by more labor, or it can become capital that reduces the labor required in the future. That is the fork in the road every time money enters your hands. Most people do not notice they are at a fork because they are living transaction to transaction. But the fork is real. Buy now or build later. Decorate the cage or widen the exit. Feed appearances or feed ownership. Chase relief or increase refusal power. Your life gets shaped by which side of that fork you repeatedly choose. The spending ceiling exists to stop consumption from hijacking every dollar. The cushion fund exists to stop randomness from hijacking your judgment. The ownership channel exists to stop labor from being your only engine. That is why I call it an operating system. It is not a trick. It is a governing logic. When the logic is right, your behavior gets simpler. You no longer renegotiate your future every payday. The money arrives, the rules activate, the percentages route the capital, and your life stops depending on mood. Mood is a terrible portfolio manager. Now let me sharpen the contrast even further. The worker mindset asks, how much did I make this month? The owner mindset asks, how much of what I made was converted into future control? The worker mindset worships gross income. The owner mindset studies allocation. The worker mindset uses raises to expand comfort. The owner mindset uses raises to expand capacity. The worker mindset sees saving and investing as what happens after living. The owner mindset understands that saving and investing are how intelligent living becomes possible at all. This does not mean every person must become an entrepreneur. That is another common confusion. Ownership is broader than business ownership. It includes owning productive assets, using tax shelters intelligently, building reserves, controlling fixed costs, and designing a life where time is not auctioned off. At the first sign of pressure, the goal is not to look rich. The goal is to become difficult to corner. I want you to think about that phrase because it matters. Difficult to corner. A person without reserves can be cornered. A person with high fixed costs can be cornered. A person with no assets can be cornered. A person whose whole identity depends on visible status can be cornered. A person who never learned where money should go before it is spent can be cornered by almost anything. But a person with a sound operating system becomes increasingly hard to trap, not because they are flashy, because they are buffered, because they are liquid enough, because they own enough, because their life costs less than their ego wanted to cost, because time is slowly moving to their side. This is also why I have little patience for the popular fantasy that there is one big move that rescues people. One hot stock, one promotion, one sale, one side hustle, one windfall, 1 year of discipline. Life is rarely repaired that way. Usually it is repaired by code, clean, repeated, boring, durable code. You do not become rich because you had one heroic month. You become rich because your operating system stopped leaking and started routing. That change may feel small at first: 75% ceiling, 10% reserve, 15% ownership. Simple numbers, simple rules. Yet simplicity is often what powerful systems look like from the outside. Underneath that simplicity is something much more important: behavioral containment, emotional control, capital allocation, tax awareness, risk management, compounding, optionality. That is not small. That is infrastructure. If you are young, this matters because time can magnify a good system with absurd force. If you are older, it matters because the absence of a system gets more expensive every year you delay. Either way, the operating system is not optional. You are already running one. The only question is whether it serves you or consumes you. A bad operating system makes every paycheck disappear faster than it arrives. A mediocre operating system lets you survive, but keeps you anxious. A strong operating system slowly converts effort into autonomy. That is the whole point. Autonomy, not just a larger number on a screen, not a prettier lifestyle, not a better photo. Autonomy means the gap between what you need and what you fear begins to widen in your favor. Autonomy means you can think long-term without lying to yourself. Autonomy means the future stops feeling like an ambush. The final mistake I want to kill is the idea that you must earn a huge income before any of this matters. Nonsense. High income makes execution easier, but low income makes structure more urgent. The smaller the margin, the more damaging chaos becomes. Rules matter most when money is tight because bad allocation hurts faster. Do not wait for wealth to become disciplined. Use discipline to become wealthier. Do not wait for confidence to start. Use rules until confidence becomes the side effect. Do not wait until your life looks stable. Build the operating system that creates stability in the first place. And do not tell me you need a more complicated answer. People often ask for complexity, when what they really want is escape from accountability. Complexity lets them feel sophisticated without changing behavior. I do not find that useful. Useful is a ceiling on spending. Useful is a reserve between you and panic. Useful is regular ownership of productive assets through tax-intelligent channels. Useful is what survives contact with real life. So here is the test. The next dollar that enters your life will reveal more about your future than your intentions ever will. Will it be spent because you were tired? Will it be absorbed by a lifestyle that keeps raising its own rent? Will it be left unassigned until chaos claims it? Or will it be routed by a system that puts consumption in bounds, defends you against shocks, and turns labor into ownership? That is the door. On one side is the old operating system: more income, same fear, more work, same fragility, more purchases. Same dependence, a life that looks active but never becomes secure. On the other side is a quieter path, a life where spending has borders, emergencies meet a wall, assets start multiplying beneath the surface, and your future stops depending entirely on your next paycheck. Most people know which side they want. Very few install the code. That is why the gap between ordinary earning and real wealth stays so wide. It is not just income, it is not luck, it is not talent. It is the operating system. And if you do not change it now, then 5 years from today, you will likely have a more polished excuse, a higher set of expenses, and the same old fear wearing nicer clothes. If you do change it, the early rewards will seem almost invisible. Less chaos, more cash left over, a reserve slowly filling retirement accounts beginning to hold real assets, small tax advantages compounding in the background, boring, humble progress. Then one day the operating system becomes visible. You notice that a surprise bill no longer changes your breathing. You notice that your employer no longer feels like your owner. You notice that the market noise matters less because your process matters more. You notice that your capital has started doing part of the work your body used to do alone. That is when people call you lucky. I call it correctly routed money. So choose. Keep running a system built by impulse, appearances, and monthly amnesia, or install one that turns income into structure, structure into ownership, and ownership into freedom. No one can make that choice for you. But the next decade will obey whichever code you choose to run,